Some people walk into your life quietly. No warning, no sign, just suddenly they're there, and everything that came before them starts to look a little blurry. I've held a human heart in my hands, not metaphorically, literally. Gloved hands, surgical lights, 4 people watching my every move, and someone's actual heart, beating or trying to, right there in my palms. I've done it dozens of times. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. It's Tuesday for me. But here's what nobody tells you about spending your career keeping other people's hearts alive. Sometimes you completely forget to protect your own. And before I tell you this story, I want you to know one thing. I'm not someone who falls easily. I'm not someone who cries at movies or believes in signs from the universe. I'm practical. I'm disciplined. I drink bad hospital coffee, and I work 14-hour shifts, and I go home to a quiet apartment, and I call that a good life. I believed that. For a long time, I really believed that. Then came the Tuesday night in February that changed everything. If you're new here, welcome. Subscribe before this is over, because I promise you this story gets complicated in the best possible way. A life that looked full. Emptiness doesn't always look like darkness. Sometimes it looks like a very organized schedule. My name is Sophie Renard. I'm 34. I work at OR Memorial in Boston, and I have for 8 years. I was married once, briefly, to a genuinely good man named Patrick who loved me more than I knew how to love him back. We parted without hatred, which somehow made it sadder. He deserved someone who chose him every day without having to think about it. I wasn't that person. I still don't entirely know why. After Patrick, I just worked. That's not a complaint. I love what I do. I love the OR. I love the precision of it. I love that moment when the monitor steadies and everyone in the room exhales at the same time. There's nothing like it. But there's a photo in my locker. It's a coastline. Pale cliffs, gray-green water, the kind of sky that looks like it's thinking. I cut it from a magazine years ago. I've never been there. I keep telling myself I'll go someday. Someday. The most dishonest word in any language. That was my life before him. Competent, controlled, quietly incomplete. 11:47 p.m., a Tuesday in February. In medicine, everything changes in seconds. In life, it turns out, it works the same way. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. Cardiac event. Male, early 40s, collapsed at a private gala 3 blocks from the hospital. His security team had brought him in. No ID, they said. Privacy protocol. I didn't question it. I just moved. The next 4 hours were surgery. I won't make it sound dramatic in a cheap way, because real surgery isn't dramatic. It's focused. It's quiet concentration and fast decisions, and trusting your hands when your brain is too tired to lead. There was one moment where I wasn't sure. I kept going anyway. That's what you do. He stabilized at 3:14 a.m. when I finally stepped back and let the team close. One of his security men approached me in the hallway, calm, measured voice. "Dr. Renard, the man you just saved is Callum Ashworth." I knew the name. Everyone in Boston knows the name. The Ashworth Group, shipping, real estate, old money going back 100 years. The kind of family that has a building named after them at every university in the city. I nodded, went to write my notes. He was just a patient. That's what I told myself. I meant it at the time. The man who didn't say thank you. Respect, I've learned, is rarer than attraction and far more dangerous. He woke up, irritating. That's the only word for it. Sharp eyes, immediate questions, zero softness. He wanted to know how long he'd been out, what the procedure was, and when he could leave, in that order. No good morning, no thank you for saving my life. I told him he could leave when I said so. He looked at me the way people look at something they didn't expect. Not warmth, more like recalibration. We talked every morning. I don't know when the conversation stopped being clinical. On the second day, he asked why I became a surgeon. I said, because hearts are predictable when you understand them. He said, you don't actually believe that. And I paused, too long, and he saw it. On the third day, I found him standing at his window at 5 a.m, just staring at the harbor. I asked if he was all right. He said, I was just thinking, this is the most still I've been in 2 years. He didn't look at me when he said it, which somehow made it more honest. On day 5, he was discharged. He took his care instructions. He listened carefully, actually carefully, the way people do when they're paying real attention and not just performing it. Then he said, I'm not good at saying thank you, but I know what you did. I watched his security team close around him the moment he cleared the doors. He became unreachable in seconds, like a door shutting. That evening in my apartment, I realized I could recall every specific thing he'd said over 5 days, every exact word. I noticed that the way you notice you've been humming a song, only after you've been doing it for a while. When he came back, the second arrival is always more frightening than the first. The first time, you don't know what's coming. The second time, you do. 6 weeks later, Callum Ashworth walked back into OR Memorial. Not as a patient. He'd donated a new cardiac wing. There was a formal event. Press, administrators, board members. His PR team had arranged for me to be there as the surgeon from his emergency. I hadn't been asked, I'd been arranged. I was annoyed about that right up until he crossed the room toward me, before greeting anyone else. Apparently, that never happens. He had a proposition, a fellowship, funded by his foundation, built on my published research in congenital defect repair. He'd read my papers. I could tell immediately. You can always tell the difference between someone who skimmed your work and someone who actually sat with it. I told him I'd seen wealthy donors before. I knew how this worked. He said, I'm not trying to buy your approval, Dr. Renard. I'm trying to do something with the years you gave back to me. I agreed to one meeting. 6 weeks of Thursdays. You never fall in love in a single moment. You fall in 100 small ones, and you only recognize it looking back. The fellowship meetings happened every Thursday. Conference room, 3rd floor. Professional. And then, slowly, they weren't. The second week, he brought coffee, my exact order, which I'd never told him. Someone had researched it. He looked genuinely embarrassed when I noticed, which was the most human I'd ever seen him. The third week, we had a real argument about whether legacy or innovation mattered more in medicine. 90 minutes. Neither of us backed down. I drove home energized in a way I hadn't felt in years. The 5th week, he came in having clearly read one of my older papers, not the recent ones, an early one tucked away in a journal most people skip. He asked a question about a footnote that only someone paying close attention would even notice. He never flirted, never crossed a line, but he gave me his complete, focused attention every single Thursday without exception. My colleague, Petra, brilliant, blunt, one of my closest friends, pulled me aside after week 4 and said, I've seen that look before, Sophie. Be careful. I told her she was imagining things. I was lying. I knew I was lying when I said it. The harbor. The most intimate conversations aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes intimacy is just walking beside someone in the cold and not needing to fill the silence. After a foundation dinner in late March, he asked if I wanted to walk with him to the harbor. It came out impulsive. I could tell it surprised him, too. We walked. He talked about his father for the first time. Not grief, exactly. Something more complicated than grief. His father had been brilliant and demanding, and died 2 years ago before Callum could say something he'd needed to say for a decade. I asked what he'd have said. Long pause. That I was tired of being exactly who he needed me to be. I didn't say anything. I just walked beside him. Then he looked at me and said, not romantically, but with this terrible honesty that hit harder than any romantic thing could, I don't know how to want things for myself anymore. I don't know if I remember how. I told him something true. I said, the night you came into my OR, there was one moment I wasn't sure I could do it, and I just kept going anyway. Sometimes that's all wanting is, just keeping going. He didn't respond, but he reached over and adjusted my coat collar against the wind. Just that, nothing more. I sat in my car for 20 minutes when I got home. Just sat there in the dark with the engine off, not ready to go inside yet. The thing I found. The truth doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it just appears quietly and ruins everything gently. Tetra found me in the break room 3 days later. She showed me a legal filing on her phone, public record, easy to find if you knew what to look for. The Hargrove case. Callum's family had contested a will after his father's death. The woman involved, Diane Hargrove, had been privately loved by his father for 11 years. She was a nurse. When he died, the estate excluded her entirely. Callum had signed off on the legal structure. Diane Hargrove died 8 months later. I read it standing up, holding a cold coffee cup. I had known Diane Hargrove. Not the name, I hadn't known the name, but an older woman on my ward in her final months, quiet and heartbroken in a way that had nothing to do with her body. I remembered her hands. I remembered that she never had visitors. The connection hit me like cold water. I canceled our next meeting without explanation. I want to be clear, this wasn't simple. I didn't think Callum was a monster, but I realized standing in that break room that I had let myself feel safe with someone before I knew who he really was. And that grief, that particular kind, is about yourself as much as the other person. He came alone. An apology without explanation is just noise, but a truth offered without defense, that's something different entirely. 3 days later, Callum showed up at the hospital without his team. No security, no assistant, just him, in a coat that looked like he'd put it on quickly, asking if we could talk. I was professional, cold professional, the kind that's worse than angry. He asked what happened. I told him what I'd found, plainly, no performance. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me the truth. He'd pushed to include Diane in the settlement. His father's legal team had blocked it due to other estate claimants. He'd made the call under the worst grief of his life, under pressure he hadn't known how to handle. At 39 years old, suddenly running a 100-year-old empire alone. He hadn't forgiven himself. And Diane's daughter, a girl named Wren, 9 years old, he'd been supporting her privately through an anonymous trust since the day Diane died. No press, no credit, no one knew. I asked, why didn't you just tell me any of this? He said, because I didn't want you to think I was buying absolution. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, you could have just told me you were human. That would have been enough. Not a fairy tale, something better. Real love doesn't fix you. It just makes you willing to be seen, broken edges and all. I didn't fall into his arms that afternoon. This isn't that kind of story. I told him I needed time. I told him I was someone who needed to be sure, because I'd been not sure before and I knew what that cost. He nodded. No argument, no pressure. He said, I'll wait. I'm not going anywhere. Then, quietly, almost to himself, I have a doctor monitoring me very carefully. I'm told I have to take better care of myself. It was the first time he'd made me smile in weeks. The next months were slow, honest. We started over, actually over, from the beginning, with none of the assumptions we'd built up. There were dinners where we were nervous and slightly awkward. There were conversations that went until 2 a.m. about nothing important and everything that mattered. One afternoon in late autumn, he asked me where I'd go if I could go anywhere. I described the coastline from the photo in my locker. Pale cliffs, gray-green water, that thinking sky. He went quiet. Then he said that coastline was near his family's original estate, the old one, before the money grew large enough to lose its own edges. He hadn't been back in years. We went the following spring, together. I finally understood why I'd kept that photo all this time. What I know now. I didn't save his life and then fall in love with him. I saved his life and then, slowly, stubbornly, honestly, I fell in love with who he chose to become. Love didn't fix either of us. He still works too much. I still sometimes come home and sit in silence because I don't know how to ask for what I need. We're both works in progress, which honestly makes us a good match. What changed is this. I stopped treating my own life like a waiting room, stopped assuming that someday was a real plan, stopped keeping myself so controlled that nothing could reach me. He asked me once what I was most afraid of. I said, losing people I can't afford to lose. He said, that means you have people. That's not fear, that's just love with nowhere to put itself. I've held hearts in my hands my whole career. I've kept them beating through sheer will and training and refusal to quit. But learning to let my own heart be held, that took something else entirely. If you made it all the way here, thank you, really. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever met someone who made you just want to stop? Stop running, stop performing, stop pretending you had everything figured out? If this story moved you even a little, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you haven't. I'll be back with another story that I think will stay with you. Until then, take care of your heart, in every sense of the word.